welcome to the Shipper Update. I'm Anthony Smith, Chief Economist here at FreightWaves, and it's Friday, so that means we have a week in review. So kicking off here, we have new one-family homes sold, so single-family homes sold. And what we saw in the latest data point was that there was a downward movement for the most recent month, showing that there was a decline in the most recent sales. So showing that there was increase in the previous month of 801,000 is now down to 772. So the decline isn't major. Its point is 2%, which is somewhat significant, but not as huge as some of the swings that we've been seeing, especially in some of the different regions or year-over-year basis. The concerning thing comes into some of the different components of it. So when you look at the 772 homes that were sold, the different components that shows out that we see from the report from the U.S. Census Bureau shows that there were 209,000 of those homes that have not even been started or are not even under construction yet. Out of those 772, 359 are still under construction. That leaves just 204 of those 774,000 that are completed. So there is still a long way to go in overall housing activity. There's still a lot more homes to be built or that are still being built right now, even though that housing activity is starting to somewhat ease right now. We're expecting somewhat of an easing pattern because when we're looking at some of the expectations that we had put in place of the expectations of more increases for mortgage rates, that there's going to be a little bit of a pull forward from those consumers that are potential home buyers into getting into the housing market. So those consumers looking to get in the housing market pulled some of those purchases forward as much as they could. So that could mean that we're expecting a little bit softening or slower sales cycles or start cycles as we get into some of the traditionally busier months of the year. As we move into this is going to be pertinent, of course, because it's going to have implications for a flatbed demand as building product materials get hauled throughout the country. Also, the downstream implications as well. When you get a new home, it also leads to a lot of other downstream impacts where those consumers make bigger purchases. Maybe they're in a market for a house, but they can't find a house, so maybe that new car that they try to get a deal on, or maybe they got a new house, but they don't want old furniture, so they get a good deal on some new couches and appliances and things like that. So there are some downstream impacts for those new homes going up. It doesn't just stop at flatbed, but we're going to have to be watching closely because when we look at the HPSI, the Home Purchasing Sentiment Index from Fannie Mae that we partner with, we see that there is an all-time high and consumers thinking that mortgage rates are going to go up. And we're also seeing that a lot more of those consumers or potential home buyers are thinking that this is a bad time to buy, but a great time to sell. So that could mean that we're starting to peak at some of the housing sentiment moving forward. As we look at inventories right now, it's sitting just over 6 months. So that is showing that there is a substantial supply of homes right now. There are a lot of other underlying trends that we could get into in another Shipper Update when we have a deep dive into housing market trends, and we'll likely get into that next week as we have some really cool releases. But this is Friday, so we got to talk about this week's releases. Going into our next chart here, we have an interesting takeaway because we have orders that really kind of showed some interesting movements here. Durable good orders had a 2.2% downward movement. So when we look at this downward movement that we're seeing in this blue line for durable goods orders, not too much of a surprise here on our end, just because we saw over the same time frame some downward movement and van volumes as well. So when we're looking at this number, this is going to be one of those things that precedes durable goods shipments and production because those orders are going to need to be placed first. But when we kind of get this data point, it's going to be on a monthly basis. So I love this U.S. Census Bureau data because it's very granular, gets broken down. You get to see what section's doing what subcomponents really outperforming. But when you compare it with some of the sonar data, you can see near real time what's happening. And so when we're looking at these volumes really dropping off, this is really telling me that there's potential drop off as well for more orders, more production for durable goods. When we're looking at durable goods, that classification is going to be designated to those goods that have a shelf life of 3 years or more. Fun fact, clothes are not included in that durable goods order. It's going to be under 3 years for that shelf life expectation. So we're looking at this trend here. We're going to expect that there's likely going to be some downward movement here. The really big takeaway, the really big interesting trend that we did see within this report, and as our next chart here, which is going to come from it's a mouthful here, the non-defense capital goods new orders excluding aircraft. And so essentially that's a big, long, fancy way of saying business to business activity. And so when we're looking at our next chart here, we're also going to see that compared to my favorite index. You know, I couldn't go an update without talking about it. That is in the orange line, the flatbed outbound tender rejection index. And we're looking at what's going on within the upstream industrial sector. We're seeing that there is, of course, growth going on, but there is an expectation that we've had could be anticipating here. So we're seeing that there was a 0.3% downward movement in the most recent month for non-defense capital goods here. Only 1 month of downward movement, so it's not indicative of a trend just yet, but it is something to watch closely because this index does precede industrial production and thus upstream overall activity. But that's going to do it for this shipper update. I'm going to toss it back over to Kaylee Nix.